What's going on, guys? Waco from Revolution. Welcome to my Geneva apartment with the man of the hour, Oliver Müller, Mr. LuxeConsult, Mr. Morgan Stanley report on the Swiss watch industry. It's just come out, and we have the pleasure and honor of him being here with me today to talk about the Swiss watch industry. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you, Wei, for having me.
So let's talk about first the overall top line figure, right? So there was growth in the Swiss watch industry last year, 26.7 billion now. So does that mean that the industry is fundamentally healthy?
It is fundamentally healthy, and I think in the long term we will still see growth, but the picture is a little bit diverse depending on the brands. But in any case, we achieved another record year after 2022, which was already the highest, and we achieved more than that.
But what we're seeing right now is that for the first time, the watch industry is facing a little bit more of a challenge, right? For the last couple of years, we've had this kind of like tsunami of interest in watches. Speculators jumped in, watch prices in the secondary market were going absolutely berserk, right? And as a result, you could pretty much sell anything. But now we've come back to an era of sanity and rationalism. And in that era, you have a clear divide between the brands that are even more powerful and will probably gain market share this year and those that will kind of fall off the radar a little bit. So let's talk about the first brand, which was the clear winner last year, and to me will definitely be the clear winner this year, and that is the greatest brand on earth, and the one I'm wearing, Rolex. Correct, sir?
That's correct. Yes, they do an outstanding job. It's a never-ending growth. The demand is still there, even if we have seen the prices on the secondary market coming down as a logical consequence of less speculation. A lot of people who came into this market just to earn the quick buck by flipping the pieces are luckily out again, and now we are faced with the real clients. The prices came down, yes, but they are still substantially higher than the official retail on the secondary market. So it's still very healthy, and I'm not seeing any down movement, or I'm not seeing any black clouds coming up for Rolex. Not in the midterm, not in the long term.
Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit about the secondary pricing, but before that, let's look at the figures that you publish. So we have annual revenue last year of 10.1 billion, which is actually up almost $1 billion from the year before, which is incredible.
Yes.
But the thing that you guys need to know about Rolex is that 100% of the watches are sold through their retail network, correct? So then actually the retail value of those watches is 15.1 billion, right? And that means that Rolex is in a category all to itself in the watch industry. Would you agree, sir?
Yes, I totally agree. It's going to change because, as we know, they have acquired Bucherer, so that is going to change the game substantially. Maybe we can dig into that later on. They had one boutique worldwide, so almost 100% through wholesale or through third-party retailers. It's just amazing. They could. You're asking yourself, can they do more than that? I think so.
Wow.
Mono-product brand, they do 10 billion. Other multi-product brands, luxury brands, do less than that. So that shows the sheer power of Rolex. And last but not least, Rolex has such a dominant position that no other luxury brand has in its own category. No one.
I totally agree. Rolex should be like a category unto itself. It could even be a religion, because if you go to any country on earth, you could go to a country where no one spoke your language and you didn't even understand what they were saying, but if you said the word Rolex, pretty much everyone would understand what that is, right? So let's look at the figures again. So we have 10.1 billion Swiss francs at the, I guess, wholesale level, because
yes,
they are doing, as you say, the very vast majority of their watches through the retail network,
right,
and 15.1 billion Swiss francs at the retail level, which means they're actually, I don't want to say giving away, but they're kind of giving 5 billion of profit to their retail partners like every year. I mean, that's pretty amazing. You know, why do you think they believe so much in partnerships?
It's in the culture, in the company culture, that you need it upwards in the manufacturing and downwards in sales, that you needed partners who have an expertise that the brand is not meant to master, which is retailing, which is an expertise per se. But as we have seen recently, they have changed their minds. So I think the future is definitely going towards capturing their own retail. And unlike what many people said after they acquired Bucherer, that it was a defensive move, meaning that they acquired it to avoid that anyone else would acquire it, I don't think so. It's a long-term strategy. It was very well thought through. The announcement of the CPO with Bucherer was just the first chapter. Then they acquired Bucherer. And I'm pretty much sure, and that's only my very personal opinion, that other acquisitions will follow.
You know, buddy, I tend to agree with you as well. I think it was, you know, because you were saying at one point they were having partnerships in manufacturing and then partnerships in retail. If you look at what has happened with Rolex, now it's completely verticalized in terms of manufacturing. So there, it stands to be, or logic would kind of dictate that you would then also verticalize at the retail level as well. And you've seen, as we've discussed, the first step with their acquisition of Bucherer, there's pretty much one huge player in Asia, and there's one huge player in the Middle East as well. I think we're thinking of the same ones. It's funny because I asked both of those guys, like, hey, are you next?
Yes.
And they just laughed at me. But they laughed at me like, they were like
it's kind of questions you shouldn't ask.
Exactly.
You remember that we had that panel at Watches and Wonders last year,
right,
and we spoke about that, and one of the two you were talking about said, today I prefer to be a Rolex retailer in Asia rather than in Europe. I'm not so sure, but you know, I mean, what is better? Maybe a joint venture could be one way to go for these guys, but I'm pretty sure Rolex will continue to acquire and verticalize, that's for sure.
Looking at the figures that you have published also, if it's 10.1 billion at wholesale and 15.1 billion at retail, then it stands to reason that the average margin to retailers is about 30%, right?
Yes.
So 30% from an absolute margin perspective is not particularly high, but you have to understand that every Rolex is delivered to you, you have no problem selling. In fact, you kind of have to choose who you deliver it to. Even in a market where secondary prices have come down, as you say, most of the references are still trading for a little bit above to a lot above what the actual retail price is. And the other thing is, if you are a Rolex retailer, basically more than 50% of what you sell is Rolex, right? And you actually use Rolex to attract people to your store to sell everything else as well. So Rolex is not just from a top line figure position incredibly dominant. I always say that without Rolex, there's no Swiss watch industry. And I think that every retailer in the world would agree with me as well.
I totally agree. Creates traffic. It stands for Swissness. It's not the only brand. Let's not forget about Audemars, my love mark Omega,
yes, Patek,
yes, and other great brands like Vacheron Constantin. But yes, Rolex is definitely on a planet of its own. It's disconnected from any economical reality.
Now, the last thing is also, if you look at the number of watches that you posted as a figure, I believe it's 1,240,000 and the 10.1 billion, then you're coming up with an average price point of 12,000, right?
Yes.
Which I have to say is really interesting because 10 years ago, right, I would imagine the average price point of Rolex to be considerably less.
Yes.
So what we have seen also, and I think this is a lot of the brilliance of the leadership of Jean-Fred Dufour as well, is the consistent pushing up of terms of Rolex in terms of not just the price point, but also the quality as well. Also the positioning of the watch as a high luxury watch. Also the materials that are being used now is ceramic and so on like that as well. But the watch is now being positioned as a higher end watch, even though it has its roots as a tool watch. I think the great part about what his strategy was he then took the watch brand called Tudor to fill this gap of the luxury tool watch, right? Which then Rolex vacated, but then Tudor came and occupied that, and occupied it in an incredibly strong way.
It's a perfect analysis way. I couldn't add anything. It's just you have to take in consideration also regarding the average price, which continues to increase, that they have done quite substantial price increases in the last few years. One reason are adverse FX rates, exchange rates, because they produce 100% in Switzerland. Let's not forget about that. So when you sell in renminbi or other currencies which are not so favorable towards the Swiss franc, those price increases also help to push upwards. But the main reason, and you're perfectly right, your analysis is to the point. He is constantly, the brand is, but we know Jean-Fred is very focused on that. He's pushing the whole collection upwards, more precious metals, more gem set, and increasing constantly the quality. I admire very much Rolex coherence and consistency over all topics, not only the product, about everything around the brand. I think for me, it's basically, if not the best, one of the best luxury brands overall.
Absolutely. Okay, so next brand that I want to talk to you about is Cartier, right? So Cartier, based on the figures that you posted in your report, is 3.1 billion at the wholesale level, right? It is making 660,000 watches. But what's remarkable to me about this is that the average price point of a Cartier is 5,700 Swiss francs. First of all, I want to say a huge congratulations to Cyril Vigneron, who I think has done an amazing job with Cartier, right? Extraordinary.
Yep.
And we forget sometimes that Cartier was, I don't want to say lost, but not in the same position that it was 8 years ago before he joined the brand, right? It was a little bit, meandering in terms of where it wanted to be. Did it want to be a complicated brand? Did it want to be a sports watch brand? And Cyril came back and reconnected it with its position as the king of elegance, which it is rightly so, right? And in so doing, he re-empowered Cartier, he re-empowered the iconic shapes of Cartier, and has made it the juggernaut it is today. But what is remarkable to me about Cartier, it's one of those brands where the actual average price of the watch is quite a bit lower than the perceived value. And I think that's an incredible magic trick to have, to be able to say, when I see a Cartier, I'm like, wow, that's beautiful, that's special. And even if the price is a lot more accessible than we realize it.
Yeah, that's you summarized everything perfectly. The value perception of Cartier is a lot higher than its actual price positioning, and that's very unique. I can't think of many luxury brands having that advantage. It's very unique. Maybe Tiffany, where you would imagine that it's positioned a lot higher, but whereas you can buy at a quite accessible price. Cartier has a unique history. It's one of the watch brands, I'm talking only about watches here, it's one of the watch brands with the most iconic products in its portfolio. More or less, a little bit less than Rolex, because Rolex has only iconic products, so as to say, not only, but almost. And what is an iconic product? It's the market which decides after 20 years if the product is still there, still in demand, high demand. And that's what Mr. Vigneron did fantastic. When he came, you were saying meandering. That's a very nice way of saying that the brand was a little bit lost, trying to be someone else than they would be. It was not their DNA to do high mechanical complications. Cartier is, as you said, it's an elegant watch, it's a dress watch, unique designs, the Tang, the Pasha, the Santos, etc. All those are icons. The oldest one being older than 100 years, and it's still around.
Incredible. Okay, let's go from Cartier to the brand that's on your wrist, which is helmed by one of our favorite guys, Reinhold Eichelmann, and that is Omega. So even in a tough market, Omega has posted some growth. It's at 2.6 billion. Tell me about your perspective on Omega.
Omega is a generalistic brand, so it's an advantage, but it's also the challenge to always keep those four pillars, which are Constellation, Seamaster, Speedmaster, and Deville. I have worked there, so I know a little bit. Still, I remember. So it's quite a challenge to keep that balanced. In communication, you need to shift from one line to the other. They're quite different. Seamaster and Speedmaster are quite comparable. Tool watches, one linked to diving, the other one to the conquest of space, which is very, very unique. I'm very confident for the brand. Reinhold delivered an outstanding job. Guys, I'm not only saying this because he's my friend, as Mr. Dufour is at Rolex. They do both an excellent job. I think Omega has still a lot of potential. My advice, and Reinhold knows and he will love when he sees and hear this, I would focus a lot more on Omega's main strength, which is the precision, chronometrical precision. It's the number one brand, whatever people think. With Rolex, I think those are the two champions of chronometry. It's a very technical brand, very unique history, long history since 1848, etc. So they have the icons, they have the right DNA, they have that very unique link and bond to the NASA with the moon watch, first watch on the moon, whatever people say. Okay, some say also that no one ever went to the moon, but that's another story.
Yeah, you know, I have to say one of the things that I love both about Rolex and Omega is that behind the scenes, they're quietly focused on improving the chronometry of the wristwatch to unprecedented levels, you know? One of the things that was launched last year was the Omega Spy Rate system, right? Which is a way of like adjusting the hairspring so it's even more precise. I think for most journalists, it kind of flew over their heads. There is a real fundamental sense of innovation that's happening at Omega to genuinely improve the performance. I think this is one of the reasons why they adopted Metas, for example, for their watches, you know? And it's wonderful when you have brands where their in-house level of testing is higher than the cost, right? Although they also have costs. Now, Rolex has something very similar. Rolex is also really interesting to me because now they're shifting to their own type of escapement as well, which is their own in-house escapement, I guess to some degree in the way in which Omega adopted the coaxial, to reduce sliding friction in the performance of watches to improve performance. And their own in-house chronometric test is at a much higher standard. It's -2+2 than Costco's, you know? So I find that really amazing that these two brands are not resting on their laurels, but they're pushing their story forward.
Yes, and it will be the next battlefield of high-end watchmaking, definitely. For me, those two brands are setting the standards. I always like, if I may, because I'm an old man like
me too.
And old men like to tell anecdotes. So in '99, when we launched the coaxial, I spent a whole day with a man called George Daniels.
Wow,
and I was sitting next to him. Basically, my main mission was to refill gin and tonic because he was very fond of it. And he told me the whole story about how he developed the coaxial, etc., with the coming from the idea of the échappement naturel of Abraham Louis Breguet, etc., etc. And he told me the whole story. And in the evening, we went for dinner, and he was trying to explain to the Omega people. I was very junior, I had nothing to say, but opposite from me, I'm not going to name him, was the VP marketing back in those days. And Mr. Daniels was telling him, don't do COSC with the coaxial. Coaxial, you're in your own league. You should invent a new standard of chronometrical precision. So long before that was implemented, Mr. Daniels already knew that Omega needed to foster something around the pure precision to make people understand that this precise movement is a lot better than anything else you could find on the market. So
incredible. So let's go from Omega to Audemars Piguet at 2.35 billion, up a couple of $100 million from last year. Now, what's very interesting was I talked to Francois Benamias last year, and he said, Wei, you know what's interesting? There's no luxury watch brand that has achieved parity between male and female customers, right? So if you think about it, most brands are either male skewed or female skewed. For example, Rolex, probably a little bit more male skewed, right? Let's say 70-30, something like that. And Cartier, the opposite. Cartier is probably a little bit more female skewed, you know, probably 70-30 and the opposite.
Omega is near parity.
Oh, Omega's near parity. Yeah. So what Francois was saying was, wouldn't it be interesting if we could achieve parity at Audemars Piguet? Because right now, Audemars Piguet stands in a very advantageous position where for every watch that they make, there's someone that wants to buy it, right? And that is a very, very important thing to have. It also assures that your secondary pricing is essentially higher than your primary, which then pretty much guarantees your primary business, right? So if you start to increase volumes for your men's watches, maybe that might affect that that adversely. Whereas you still have an opportunity with your women's watches. And his idea was, I want to make the women's watches of Audemars Piguet the Birkin bag of women's watches, right? And it's interesting too, because if you think about it, the average woman, if you ask her what watch would you like, she's probably not going to come to AP at first. She might say, I would like a Rolex, or she might say, I might want a Cartier, right? Or maybe she might want a Van Cleef & Arpels, I'm not sure. But an AP is fundamentally an amazing choice. And an AP, interestingly, will be a choice that if she goes for that, her male partner, if she has a male partner, will say, that's a great choice. I love that watch. So his idea was they had really wanted to grow the female market. Whether or not that has a bearing on them selecting Ilaria Resto to be a CEO, probably not. I think she's probably a great CEO in her own right, but it is interesting, and I know they're absolutely chasing this. What do you think about that?
I fully agree and understand why Francois told you that, because it's also where you can still get some growth. Let's be basic. I mean, on the men's segment, product segment, they're already so strong. They still have a lot of potential. Francois always said that they could even still double the sales. He's very, always very straightforward. I would agree with that. It's probably a brand with one day will stand at 4 or 5 billion sales. Is it in 10 years, 20 years, whatever? They have all the time. Going into the ladies segment is a very clever move. Definitely, and you're seeing the limited series that they're launching, the communication much more feminine on some of their campaigns. I would definitely do that. Yes, sure. There is a lot of potential there.
Yeah, it was funny. I'm lucky enough to own the blue ceramic Royal Oak Perpetual Calendar, which apparently is quite a cool watch to have. Mine's
and a good investment.
A good investment. Well. However, he said that when they were allocating this watch initially, they gave him the allocation list of who they wanted the watch to go to. Back in when he was there, he had to approve every person individually. And he said, there's a problem here. It's all guys. And they said, what do you mean? He said, I want you to come back with a list that is at least half women, because there's no reason why women shouldn't be wearing this watch, and I want women to be wearing cool watches like this too. So it shows you that there was already a conscious effort on his path to engage with the female audience. But one question I have for you is the following. AP, incredibly successful, but is it a mono-product brand? Has the Code 1159 genuinely brought a new energy and a new alternative shape to AP?
I'm very, very much convinced that it was a bold move and it's a successful move. They are not yet there. The Royal Oak is still the largest family in the collection, in the whole collection. Code 1159 makes about 12% of the sales, which is already remarkable at that level in such a short time frame. So it's remarkable. It's a very nice watch. There was some controversy, so as to say, when it was launched. But it's the first time in the history, at least the recent history of Audemars Piguet, that the brand finally succeeds to do something else than the Royal Oak. We all know that the millinery, nice watch, but not really a blockbuster. The Jules Audemars, same story, etc. And then they come with the Code 1159. I think the design bears all the design codes of Audemars, but it's a different watch. And they also had a very clever strategy of applying the new movements first into the Code 1159 before moving to the Royal Oak. I think it will become successful in the long term. Is it going to be 1/3 of the sales? I don't know. It's difficult when you have such a strong product, as such an iconic product as the Royal Oak. It's difficult to come up with something else.
One thing I will say is that I, like everyone else, it took me a while to wrap my head around the Code 1159. I think the moment where I saw a watch that I loved was the Code 1159 with the star wheel. Like that watch was phenomenal, like absolutely perfect. And because of the rotating indication, it was better in a Code 1159 than it would be in a Royal Oak.
I agree. Yeah. It fits better. Yeah, definitely in terms of aesthetics and the logic also. And I found a very smart move from Francois and his team to have that ultra high complication in the code 1159,
Yes.
the one which
The
won
RD5.
Aiguille d'Or.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yes.
GPHG.
Yes.
I found that a very clever move that like lifts the code 1159.
100%, and also a big shout out to the AP team for achieving that watch as well, because I love the idea that they actually made a grand complication that actually suited the lifestyle of the people that owned it, right? Because let's face it, if a watch costs a couple $1,000,000, right? Like no one's going to spend 100% of their net worth on a watch, right?
No.
Except maybe us, right? You know, so I mean, you're looking at a guy that what is that like 1% of his net worth, right? So he's got $2 billion in his bank account, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know anyone. Well, actually, I don't know that many billionaires to begin with, but I'm just imagining a guy who's in that net worth category. He's not going to take the instruction book and sit there and flip through the book painstakingly. He's going to take the watch and go, right? He needs to be intuitive enough that he can operate the Grand Sonnerie, he can operate the perpetual counter, he can operate the split-second chronograph. He can do all of these things without breaking the watch, and I applaud AP for finally making a watch that guy can also jump into the hot tub with, right? For making a watch that suits the lifestyle of that client.
What I would value companies at?
Yes. So,
Which one?
let's start with Rolex.